one of the things you mentioned a while ago about past programming, how the course essentially throws out all the stuff that you learned in the past from religious programming. And that dealing with those layers come up and will continue to come up because they're kind of foundational programming that we got. And to see that the experience is something completely different from the belief, that, this whole thing about God condemning is part of the programming that I got, maybe you got.
Oh, yeah. Religious programming.
Yeah. And it shapes the whole worldview that we have, shapes our understanding of ourselves and our behavior and so on. And this is like, no, none of that's true. That's not the way it is at all. And it can create a clash, as you mentioned in the past, that there's like, okay, I feel this, but my reaction to feeling it is going to be based on the programming that I got in the past, whether I know it or not, not always, of course. And the more you see through that the programming was behavior. The programming essentially was control. Whoever is controlling in the situation. It's like, the stories of the wrath of God in the Old Testament, and how, it comes along and destroys Sodom and Gomorrah and all that. And that sort of stuff is exactly what a lot of our behavior is based on. Fear. The Course is saying no fear. That's not it at all. Fear always comes from the ego. What we're looking at is what's beyond the ego, so you're not going to get this condemnation kind of stuff, because God condemning is just us projecting our behaviors, and immature ones at that, on God. That God gets revenge and God gets really mad at you, and if you do this wrong, he'll punish you. But his kind of punishment you don't fiddle with. He'll totally destroy you, and this,
which has nothing to do with love.
No.
And
or expansion or peace or any of these things.
Yeah. So it's really hard to, but then we've talked before about those, earlier scriptures in the, or Old Testament that seem so much retribution, so much judgment, so much condemnation.
Yeah.
So again, though, I think about how what you're saying, how we project on what God is, but then we also do that by necessity, trying to find a meaning in the senselessness of war and the senselessness of natural disaster, and it seems so punishing that we project then what we interpret as calamity has to be punishment for something that we've done, because there could be no justice in that, and it's hard to accept that things just happen.
Yeah. That's part of it.
Or that you're powerless to powers that be, like nature or like government, and wars and things that you can't do anything about. So, to have to wrestle with powerlessness, I think creates a need to label it as something else, and then our immaturity shows through, because we label it as God doing something to humankind.
Right. It's the all-loving God that just may, whack you in the head and knock your head off in the process. And it's a completely inconsistent understanding. And it's based, I think, on just us. It's anthropomorphic, it's that's what God is. He's one of us, and it's also very vague. I don't know about you when you were taught this stuff when you were a kid, but who's God? I couldn't really get any kind of understanding of it. And of course you can't. but it's presented as some sort of entity outside you who can condemn you, and he's just fine with it. And you're just going to suffer and suffer because you didn't toe the line. And, this kind of very vague understanding of who is this? What's going on here? In the Catholic school, I had the Baltimore Catechism in the 1950s that we had to learn word for word these answers to questions that were the fundamental aspects of the religion. And the first one was, who is God? Oh, here we go. God is a supreme being who made heaven and earth. That was the answer. What's a supreme being? He makes no mistakes. Everything's perfect, but he has very little connection with me except for the fact that I have to do what he says. He supposedly loves everyone, but he sets up a situation where essentially we're in some kind of psychological prison, that we're not free to think what we want, to do what we want. We have to do what he says. And if we don't, we suffer the consequences. This is the picture that I was given. I think it's a prevailing picture that the Course completely obliterates and says none of that is true. God is not separate from you. He doesn't punish. It has nothing to do with that. That complete reorientation of understanding and awareness, I think, is the fundamental difference between what we're doing and mainstream society in terms of religion. And it also then completely changes your point of view of life, of yourself, of others, and all the things that constitute living. Instead of blaming God for everything, maybe that's not what it's about. There's no blame. It's like, why does God allow wars and suffering and everything? It's the wrong question. Why do we allow it? Why do we do these, allow these things to happen? The condemnation, I think, comes from us. We don't have to do it. We're projecting it on God, whoever God is, whatever God is, whatever he, she, it is or does is something that's completely beyond our comprehension in a waking state.
However, if you're saying that we are all God, right, and we are all part of God and God is all us, then in some sense there is truth to that.
Well, I would say on this level, we're an expression, okay? Where that everything in creation is that infinite silence in motion, in apparent motion. And the result is that you can talk about it as separate from, while at the same time it is the same as God. Because, you can get into all these weird semantics and strange mind games, but none of that is the point. The point is we experience life as individual beings. As we grow in awareness, we experience life as an expression of an infinite being. And by being, I don't mean an entity, I mean the state of being, the verb. And in doing so, we can distinguish, well, I'm an ego, and I have this history and this personality and so on, and so does everyone else, and they're all different. But at the same time, there's this unity and this oneness that transcends all that. We can view it from this diverse point of view on an ego level, or view the diversity from a unity point of view and see it's actually the same thing, but it appears to be different in our experience. Okay? So to say we are God is true and not true under those circumstances. It's the reality, but it's also not our experience. It's not what our senses tell us. And as a result, we have these ideas that God is separate from his creation, which would also be true and not true.
Do you see any drawbacks or the word that's coming to me is like fundamental flaw in the course.
I don't know. If there's a flaw, I think but it's not even a flaw. I don't really know. Like, as I've said, this is not an introductory thing. This is not even an intermediate thing, and the fact that it's out there and as a result is subject to all these misinterpretations, I think, and other things of that nature. But, everything's out there.
I was going to say, isn't that true for every sacred text, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you read the Brahma Sutras, for example, which is a text of Vedanta, like, what the heck is this saying? Especially if you read the raw sutras without any kind of commentary. It's like you have no idea what's going on here. And when you do read the commentary, unless you've had some experience with it, it seems just like the Course to be nonsense. The world is an illusion. There's only one thing. It's like, what are you talking about? If you've had no experience with the one thing, this makes no sense at all. So I don't know. I mean, I think the Course can only do what it does, and all these other more advanced systems like self-inquiry and the Vedantic methods and so on, that all of these things, the Enlightenment Intensive is another thing that really drives you into that point of view, that all of these things work if you have some background with it. In other words, if they're talking about how to integrate unity and diversity and you don't know what unity is, how can you do that? But like half of the equation is missing. Much more than half, actually, but it's missing. So, when I first ran across the Course, I didn't know what it was talking about. And I would imagine I'm projecting here, I guess, but I'd imagine that's a lot of people's experience. What is this? So I dropped it. It's like, I don't want to do this. This isn't of any use to me. And it wasn't at the time. It is now, but, 40 years ago, just about, is when I first ran across it. And 40 years ago, it was not of any use to me. It's taken me that long. I'm a little slow, I guess, but it's taken me that long to get to an understanding of what this really is. But it wasn't through reading books. It wasn't through doing the course that happened. It was through inner experience repeatedly over and over again, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, till it penetrated. And it's kind of like reading it is an illumination now. In the past, it was a puzzle. And I think, that's probably true of any text that's written from that level. But we have to treat these things, I think, not as, oh, this is nonsense because I don't agree with it or it's not my experience, and just tossing it away, which is, I didn't say it was nonsense. I just thought this isn't for me. But we tend to put down anything that isn't part of our experience. And if it's ego experience, that's pretty limited. And if they're talking about things that are very expansive, our big mistake is dismissing it simply because we don't understand. So if you can talk about a flaw, I don't know if that's a flaw in the Course. I think that's a flaw in us. The Course is written from a very high level, and we have to kind of identify at least somewhat with that level to be able to get a clue as to what's going on in the text or in the lessons or in the workbook. Manual for teachers.
Well, it seems like this is why we have so many sacred texts and different perspectives, because you can identify with something. Generally, we can identify with something.
Yeah.
And this doesn't necessarily have to be the one for you, but that the other one over there might be. And then maybe, 2 or 3 years down the road, you resonate with something else, and you're getting some information from other things. And I think we sort of, or at least I have, in the past, tended to think, oh, this is the thing, this is the one way, this is where I'm going to get all of my information. And I think we kind of we graduate through various, I don't know if graduate's a good word, because that kind of indicates a sort of hierarchy, and I don't know that but we pass through certain spaces where one particular thing is speaking to us, and then that no longer speaks.
Right.
And then we have to move to something that does speak. But by the very nature of passing through, there's judgment being passed on the thing that you no longer resonate with. And so it's almost, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't experience it as judgment. I just feel it was useful then. And sometimes I go back to that thing because there's something there I didn't see before, and it's like, oh, okay, I missed this whole thing that was there because I wasn't ready to receive it at the time. Anything that I've not occupied with at the moment is not off the table. It's just not what I'm occupied with at the moment. I think all of these traditions and all of these levels of expression are useful. Even, very primary ones, introductory ones are still useful if you're not a beginner student. They still can tell you things that you didn't see before. If it's telling you the truth with the capital T, it's there. And it doesn't mean that, we were at a place to understand it when we were just beginning the process. So, yeah, I think it's kind of cyclical. I move over here, and then I move back, then I move, and it goes on and on, going back and forth among all these different things. And there's lots of them, because there are lots of them. And it's because I think people that originated these things had experiences, expressed them according to their culture and language and time and on and on. And so as a result of that kind of perspective on this whole infinite thing is valuable, because it can give you another slant you didn't get before, and something can speak to you. So rather than like, well, okay, this surface meaning of this thing, I see something much deeper in there, but it still includes the surface meaning. It doesn't get rid of that. It's just the surface meaning kind of changes because it's in a larger context when you see the deeper.
Well, and also, no one of these can capture the whole thing, right? So everything is in its own way. It's perfect and imperfect simultaneously. And so you kind of have to move around to get aspects of the whole.
Yeah, that's a real good point. I think that's exactly the case, that it can't express everything. It's an entry point so we can get to everything, but it in and of itself can't do it, because we're talking infinity. And how is it expressed? In finite ways. There's just no way you can express the wholeness of it at any time. You have to use the means that are provided by these different systems, and as a result, get to that wholeness. Then it makes more sense. But the thing in and of itself, all these people that I ran across that said, the Bible is the word of God, which I'm sure you have, probably more than I have. But the Quran is not. And I would ask why. They couldn't really tell me. They came up with all these different things. And I said, let's face it, if you were born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be a fundamentalist Muslim now. To which they could not really respond because, well, first they weren't, but also the fact that they're looking at it from a very narrow point of view, receiving what's there from that level and imposing then that point of view on what's there. If we're open, I don't know what this means. That's very scary if you're using your religion as a security system. It's a belief that makes you feel good about yourself. It's an ego attachment. And it's not doing what it can do. I guess it's making them feel better, but in the process, that judgment comes in. You don't switch to different points of view. You don't look at different things. You only look at this because this is the truth and nothing else is. But to me, if you're talking about infinity, how can you whittle down infinity to one little thing like that? If we're all different, which we are in ego and personality, wouldn't there be an infinite number of ways to get to the infinite? Why are we different if we're supposed to all conform to the same thing? Why are we naturally different on the surface? It's all these different ways we can get to unity. But if there's only one way to get to unity, well, I'm going to contradict myself, but there is only one way to get to unity. But how you do it is infinite. We have to go beyond our egos. That's the one way. See things from a much larger perspective. How you do that is up to you.
And I think this is where you always emphasize at this point in the journey that we're talking about, experience.
Yeah.
So we can take any one of these sacred texts, viewpoints, perspectives, belief systems, but without the experience, they just become a theoretical, exercise.
Yeah.
Or a kind of something, a template that you can place over, but you're just doing a mental game. There's not there's no real, what you said, it's kind of a way in, but there's something else that has to occur. And I want to talk a little bit more about the experience with any one of these texts. There has to be an accompanying experience.
Yeah. So, otherwise, I think all of these texts are based on the experience. They're trying to express what this experience is, and maybe a little more than that. And in doing so, we can take it without the experience and see it from the level of our egos and say, well, I've never had this experience in mainstream society. It's not out there. I don't see it anywhere in the world. Maybe it is in some places. I don't know. But certainly not in the United States. So we take it from, well, it must mean this, because this is all I know, and this is all everyone that I know knows. So as a result, it must mean this. And the reason why you have, 3,000 or some types of Christianity is everyone's interpreting it from the level of ego. This must mean this. No, it must mean that. It must mean, suppose it means all those things and a lot more in one thing. Okay. And then those things that are on the surface, as I said, change their perspective when you see them from a deeper level. So the experience, I think, is what gave birth to all of these systems. And when we take the experience away, we literally don't know what they're talking about. We pretend we do, and we say it must mean this then. And that's what we go with. That most religions, I think, are the form, the appearance, but the essence isn't really there. I can't say that fully. I think it is there for a lot of people, at least to some extent. If the words are there that express this, there's something in those words that can get you somewhere. Whether it'll get you to that full place or not, I don't know. Maybe for some people it does. But you can't just believe it and hold on to it on an ego level and transcend your ego. That doesn't make any sense. To hold on to it is an ego action. To let go is transcendence. Forgiveness. I mean, what's talked about so much in Christianity? Love and forgiveness. It's like those are the pathways for letting go and expansion, and it's not ego stuff at all. And if you follow the story of Jesus, there's not much ego there, to the point where he gives up his entire life for the whole thing. I mean, that's pretty huge. I don't know how many Christians would do that now. And many people call themselves Christians, but don't follow the teachings at all, because it's been whittled down to a practice, an idea, a point of view, a belief, not life, not the experience of reality. So the experience, I think, is crucial, even though it's mostly missing. And I think especially in Protestant Christianity, it's missing. It's not really there. It's mostly, you look at any of these Protestant churches, they'll say, we follow this, whatever was declared at this meeting in 1618 or whenever it was. And it's on and on and on like that. It's a set of beliefs that you have to adhere to. And just that word adhere shows there's attachment.
Well, coming back to your idea of, unity and diversity, when you were talking about experience, I'm thinking about how subjective experience is. And I'm wondering if each one of these texts, I know they're trying to put together a method oftentimes, or, some kind of a blueprint for how you can achieve this experience. And yet each one of our experiences will be different. And then on top of that, as you said, we've kind of sanitized so much of the of this blueprint and of these methods that I don't know if we can actually get to that experience based on the text oftentimes. So what do you say about that?
I would say if infinity is infinite and is everywhere as a result, then anything at all could get you there. How you use it do you use it to get there? Do you persist with it? There's no place that it's not. That's in the Psalms as well. These things are expressed there. If the light bulb can go on by looking at it, then it can do it. It's up to the individual. And we all have different experiences in terms of things that come and go. But that experience of infinite silence is the same for everybody, because it's just infinite silence. There is no content to the experience. It's not based on any kind of individual nervous system functioning. It's based on silence, the state of being. That's all. And that would be true for everyone and everything. The tree would experience it the way a tree does, but it would still be that same experience of silence. And that is, that I think is the leveler here, that it doesn't depend on any kind of diversity. The unity is there, and it's only there. And if we come from there, we will see that.